Hello gamers. Today we're going to be doing something a little different. This is Jeff, taking a few moments to highlight something real that I believe sheds some light on what we're dealing with. You may not take what is presented here and use it for a personal grudge. Not with my permission anyway. This is put here to inform and elucidate. If you're targeting someone, you're doing it wrong, so do not. One of Alyssa Mercante's attorneys, Don McGowan, is on LinkedIn. He chose to post publicly on a topic that is not in his principal area of expertise, but related based on his activity, the topic of public safety. It so happens I am also on this network and chanced upon his post. What follows is a brief analysis of that post and my since removed rebuttal to it. This happened a few days before the lawsuit was announced. No part of this presentation comments directly on that suit. Why it matters. Let's start with who Don McGowan is. He is a prominent and influential attorney in the gaming industry. He has handled other casework, alluded to in his post here, that touches upon areas like safety on and offline. He's worked at Bungie, and before that at the Pokemon Company. As you could see here, he is a prominent figure and has the ear of many an executive in the gaming space. I commend Don on his professional success and his attention to matters of public safety. Nonetheless, he is on the wrong side of Gamergate, both of them, by his own declamation. This makes him an opponent of those who find themselves in support of Gamergate. This is why it matters. Here is my analysis and reaction. I'm going to be reading his post to start. Today's murder of Brian Thompson, CEO of United Health, is what I think will be the first of many murders / assassinations / call them what you will, that we will see as the Republicans achieve their goal of deconstructing the regulatory state. My guess on this is that we're going to discover the killer was someone whose family member was denied coverage. Perhaps they themselves were such a person. As Americans feel themselves alone against large bureaucracies with as easy access to weapons as we have in this country, some people are going to start to think of unions and social programs as having been a compromise, and they will feel themselves more pushed toward extreme measures. Edit. To pull this up from a comment, I watched as the alt-right and the incel forums created a permission structure for real-world violence. This feels similar to how that started. To be clear, I'm not saying this like it's good, but if you're at all active on social media, maybe even on LinkedIn, you might be seeing a lot of the same attitudes as I've been seeing today. Longtime fans of the feed know that I'm fairly left. The full-throated cheers for this murderer that I've seen from otherwise adults are chilling. Reports now suggest the killer took elaborate plans to evade detection both pre- and post-shooting, and it has come out that Mr. Thompson didn't have personal security, but that his family had been receiving threats. In my upcoming book, I have a section on executive protection and executive security. A lot of you may not know, I think even a lot of my exec colleagues at the time didn't know, that after my stroke in 2019, I came out of the hospital and immediately took steps to arrange for executive protection for my Pokemon exec colleagues because of threats we were receiving from the internet about their safety related to decisions made in the development of the then recent Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield video games. Later, when I was at Bungie, I caused the creation of one of the most broad-reaching anti-harassment judgments in the USA, which arose out of a person from the internet who was so angry that Bungie had done a marketing activity with a black person that he engaged in a terror campaign against our employees. This is America in the 2020s. We can't close our eyes to it. Edit. To remove something I was told looked a bit too much like a sales pitch. That wasn't my intent. If you're concerned about these issues, I'm happy to discuss them with you at your convenience and make such referrals as you might want. Please, this stuff is real. Don't ignore it or assume it can't happen to you or your people. It can, it does, it did, today. A lot to unpack there. My claim to expertise in this context is information security, or InfoSec, which is part of my work. We deal with the veracity, integrity, and security of data and people in data contexts. This is my out-of-the-box reply in this context. I'm now going to read you what I wrote in a since-deleted comment, I believe, by Don. I can no longer access this post or his profile since he has blocked me since this exchange. It is as follows. The regulatory state has been ensuring the profits of HMOs, prescription drug, and medical supply intermediaries, also known as PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, continued uninterrupted for decades. If anything, it seems they've succeeded so well, having a unique carve-out for TV advertising, biggest ad spender, and being the highest dollar lobbying outfits on the Hill, short for Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C., that anything approaching pharma and related insurance is not only beyond reproach, but also beyond criticism, unless, asterisk, it comes from the organs of embedded and conflicted press or partisan figures, usually in the not Republican Party. Otherwise, you really aren't supposed to have an opinion on the subject, except that healthcare is good and needed, of course, and that the status quo is bad because the Republicans. Okay, explains nothing, but at least there is a structure to the argument. Far be it anyone deems fit to question this momentum as a citizen. They might just be a terrorist for highlighting the obvious, really. We spend the most per capita with the worst per capita outcomes. The other stats too. Everyone with a faint interest can look them up for themselves. After almost 10 years running of uniform antagonism and demonization of Trump and half the electorate, real violence being committed against the same, now you're concerned? So I would just like to let that stand as a rebuttal. I don't see any reason to elaborate further on it. I believe that the statistics speak for themselves in this area. This is not something that is a partisan issue, nor does the organization GBAMFS or myself personally in this context seek to evaluate this in very partisan terms. I would like to point out that Don did, in his introduction to this topic, raise the issue of partisanship, and there is an inescapably partisan tone to this post, in my opinion. I think a reasonable person would be able to read that in such a way. I also do have to say I find it curious that he, in the context of this post, is seeking to offer a recommendation for security services, which is it is understandable on the one hand, but also I think a little questionable because of the nature of the incident. I don't think that that's, and especially on a personal note, opportune time to promote a security service, but that's a personal judgment. And I think that for the most part, this post is an example of the type of mentality of the person that is very anti-Gamergate. This is someone that is, in effect, apologizing for the status quo in the healthcare industry, which many Americans have misgivings, even gripes with. I do not believe it is fair to characterize in pejorative terms the concerns for so many Americans on these topics. I think that there is some legitimacy to considering these things on their own. And I also find it kind of questionable, this forced framing of the so-called alt-right incel forums. And later on, as we can see here in his second post, we get this whole, basically an implication that anyone that's against the marketing that they were doing as being conduct related to Gamergate implicitly. Right, that's kind of inescapable. And that he compares it to terrorism. He says it's tantamount to terrorism, paraphrasing here. So he's basically suggesting people that are against if you really look at this post optically, that the status quo in the healthcare system in America may just be, in effect, terrorists, and this is not too dissimilar from the pushback they got against their marketing over at Bungie, which is a real reach, in my opinion, like a real big reach. I don't believe this is unfairly paraphrased or characterized at all. So that to me seems to be kind of indicative of the mentality of Don, who is among the representatives, the attorneys for Alyssa Mercante. I find this kind of illustrative. I think we really need to look at the kind of people who are opposed to Gamergate. I think we need to look at, in a sense, this is one example. This is one person who is opposed to Gamergate, very vociferous, like very consistent. He was against the entire trend from beginning to end, going back to the original one. And this could be based on misunderstandings. This could be based on a very select and media-informed view of these things. But at the end of the day, there's a whole lot of reaches here. There's a whole lot of conflation of unrelated topics for an area that's really not, I would say, principally within Don's area of expertise. I would say that as far as information goes, right, if I were just to evaluate this on an information basis, this has very little veracity. And it conflates things in a fashion I find to be high-handed and irresponsible. But that is a very technical analysis. And it could be judged on my own rebuttal of this through a highly partisan lens. But again, that would bear out statistics and information gathering that are not within the scope of this review. I think this is just a simple analysis of what's going on in this post and my reply to it. So that's the status of this. I think it shines a little bit of a light on who Don is and what we're dealing with, going against some of these industry figures. When it comes to Gamergate, some of these people are very well connected, and they have obviously very impressive resumes if you look at that. So it's not a simple matter of people that are just anti-gamer, okay, that just disagree with maybe one or two positions that some people seem to imagine some people have. Or that some people actually do have. There's evidently a lot of worldview that goes into this, and maybe not just a little bit of partisanship. So I think that's really worth keeping in mind. And even if you're not as a part of Gamergate partisan, if you're not interested in politics, and for the most part, I'd say avoid that shit. That shit is often garbage. Avoid it if you can. But if for those that really aren't interested in that, just take a look at this post. These are the people that are denouncing gamers as basically, in effect, by implication here, I think it's pretty plain, terrorists, right, for actually associating with anything resembling Gamergate-like activities, which would be basically saying this product is not good. Your denouncements and your dismissal of consumer concerns, of artistic criticisms, of public feedback are high-handed, they're heavy-handed, they're prejudicial, among other things. In no way does that feedback constitute anything approaching terrorism, unlike what Mr. McGowan here would seem to suggest. That's ludicrous. It's beyond ludicrous. And no matter how cast in the media, these dilettantes do the legwork for some of these industry figures, are certainly doing no service to the public by allowing it to be framed or themselves framing it in those terms. The foregoing is an example of an opinion and evaluation performed by Jeff, the eponymous leader of the organization, which is known as GBAMFS. No official support for this is given by the organization. Nonetheless, it is a personal liberty that the founder has evaluated to be necessary in order to delve into the issues that are involved in the contemporary zeitgeist of the gaming ecosystem, of which GBAMFS is inevitably a part.